G'day, this video is about Romans chapter 4. Just starting with verse 5, it says, But to him who does not work, but believes on him who justifies the ungodly, his faith shall be accounted for righteousness. That's not saying that you have to be a non-worker, because that faith being accounted for righteousness, that kind of righteousness, in verse 12, he says that Jews are not sons of Abraham unless they also have that. So the Jews were doing works and then also believing and having that accounted for righteousness. So it's not saying that you have to be a non-worker. It's saying that you can be a non-worker. It's saying that you don't have to first do works before you can have this grace. Then he gives a second example of grace apart from works, or righteousness apart from works, which David had also written about, which is the forgiveness of sins. So what Paul is writing about there is two examples of righteousness apart from the works of the law, how Abraham had both of those prior to having done any works of the law, how Jews should have that forgiveness of sins and righteousness being accounted for walking in faith. In verse 12 it says that they're not true sons of Abraham unless they also have that, but also that Christians don't need the works of the law because they already have forgiveness of sins and they have faith accounted as they walk in obedience through faith. Now, before he got to verse 5, well, verse 3 was critical because he said, well, he references Genesis 15:6 where it says that Abraham's faith was accounted to him for righteousness. Here's the thing. It's not saying that Abraham's righteousness or justification started at that point, or that it was a complete justification because of that one little thing. It's just saying that there was an amount of righteousness accounted to him at that point. He was already justified by forgiveness of sins. He was walking in covenant with God, justified by forgiveness of sins, and along the way, he believed a promise. And it's written, God accounted righteousness to him. So Paul was just pointing that out, saying that is what Abraham has in common with his heirs. And you can see that in Romans chapter 4, verse 13. So that includes certain Jews, only the Jews that had forgiveness of sins through walking in faith were the true sons of Abraham, and Christians are the true sons of Abraham too. And we see the same thing being written about in Galatians, and Romans 9:8 is another good verse to look at. So it's not even talking about your initial faith in Christ. So it's not talking about you choosing to have faith in Christ and then that being a total justification for you. That's a false doctrine from the devil. And sadly, there's millions of people in hell having fallen for that. But if it wasn't that passage, it would have been another one, because it's the devil that blinds people. It's only by God's grace that you'll get a knowledge of the truth. And the truth is that you need to obey to keep God's grace. And that's why it's written that Abraham was justified by faith and works in James, because although he was not justified by works, in that he was not justified without a need for grace. That's in Romans 4:2. He was justified by faith and works, in that he did faith and works to keep the grace, as Christians do.